also initially from 2010 onwards, he is a nodal officer for H1N1, and he has got many publications, more than 80 publications, and he has been awarded 6 times good teacher. He is a very popular teacher among students. 6 times he was awarded from the KMC Manipal, and he has done a lot of courses in infectious disease from CMC Vellore, Hinduja, and observership from Detroit. And he is the best person to speak on prevention aspect in the healthcare work now, how to prevent it, because we are seeing more and more our postgraduates, doctors falling sick due to COVID-19. So it's now over to Verma to talk on preventive strategy of COVID-19 healthcare professionals. And I will request Dr. Verma to speak for about 40 minutes. Then I think I am sure that there will be some questions. If anybody has got questions, they can put it in the chat box. You can take it up. Or at the end of the lecture, we can unmute and ask, or if any questions are there, so that we can finish the session by 8 o'clock. So over to Verma.
Thank you, sir, for that introduction. Yeah, we are in midst of an unprecedented COVID infection. I think nobody in the world anticipated the extent of this problem. So I'm primarily going to talk about some principles of infection control, and then take on to the last part. I will be talking predominantly of what we are doing for protecting our healthcare workers and how we are monitoring them. So 1 minute just before I load my slides. Can you see my slides, sir?
Yes.
Hello? Now it is visible.
Yes. It is visible.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, thank you everyone for coming, respected teachers as well as my colleagues. So I'm sure some more will join in as we go on. So as I told, the first part, I will talk about the principles of infection control and some of the things what we're doing. And the second half will be about healthcare workers infection and how we are monitoring them. So let me start with principles of infection control. Just to reiterate again, COVID-19, unlike most of the viral infections of respiratory tract, can transmit infection when they're symptomatic, even when they're pre-symptomatic. That means just before they develop symptoms, about 3 to 4 days. Most data is saying up to 3 days. And they can transmit infection during asymptomatic phase. And that's also not surprising since influenza is well known to do that. The problem with COVID is the ability to infect and also the amount of virus required to transmit. So the infectivity is far higher than the other viral infections. Probably that is the reason why we are having pandemic. It's not that virulent as something like what we have seen in SARS. That is the reason probably it's more rampant. Had it been more virulent, probably it would have not become a pandemic. So just to show a simple slide, this is old publication which was published in Journal of Hospital Infection. Just to see the transmission dynamics, this is in fact common to all the respiratory illnesses. An infected person, when they cough, or when they talk, or when they sneeze, or when they sing, they can produce droplets. Most of the viral infections, including the COVID-19 infection, produces droplets usually size more than 5 micron. Okay, there's a little bit debate about it, whether what constitutes droplet, whether it's a 5, 10 or 100. But standard is, I have taken it from WHO, so 5 is acceptable. So once they produce droplets, usually they don't travel more than 1 meter, and anybody within the vicinity of 1 meter can inhale it and can cause and can get infection. The other way it can transmit is when they touch a surface which was infected previously by the patient, and they can also get, or by directly touching the patient, like for us healthcare workers, directly examining the patient without a gloved hand or without washing hands. So these are the modes by which the infection can travel. Just to reiterate again, even now, majority of the transmission of COVID-19 just like any other viral illness, is by droplet. The second mode of transmission is still by fomites or indirect contact. The controversy is still about what about airborne? All respiratory illnesses will have some amount of airborne transmission, especially when aerosol generating procedures are done. So when you produce aerosol generating procedures like tracheostomy or intubation, extubation, any of the procedures which involve respiratory tract, droplets can come, which can be less than 5 micron or can be bigger. As they go forward, they can dry up and can produce sizes less than 5. So the problem with this is that they can stay in the air for a longer time and probably travel. Just to reiterate again, which WHO also confirmed again, even though it's airborne, we are not yet sure that airborne transmission can occur when we usually talk or when we converse with somebody. That is where the controversy. I think there is no controversy whether when an aerosol producing event is done, whether it can become airborne. Second important thing you need to understand is when it is airborne or airborne precautions are advised, it is not as bad as something like measles or chickenpox. So the degree of airborne transmission is far lesser. Just to reiterate about simple principles of infection control, I'm sure all of you know about this chain of infection. This is just depicting the way the SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 gets transmitted. Our whole emphasis of infection control is to break this chain, not at one point, but at multiple points. Like triaging people who are symptomatic and asymptomatic, probably that's a real challenge. Portal of exit simply by giving a mask to the patient, which I'm going to reiterate again. Then transmission precautions by whenever a patient gets admitted. Then finally, isolating COVID patients from a non-COVID. So make sure that the susceptible host is not within the vicinity of an infected patient. So there's a physical separation. So whole emphasis about this and how we are going to achieve it and its effectiveness decides how good infection control is. So just to reiterate some of the 4 or 5 basic principles of infection control. If an infected patient is there, which could be a source of infection, and we are the susceptible host or the healthcare workers, roughly about 3 to 6 feet is the infected zone, right? So the first thing you're going to do always is a source control more than the control of the susceptible host. Always give the patient the mask. That itself can reduce your infection rates significantly to the tune of 70 to 80%. So that's called source reduction. That is same principle we use for any infection, in fact. Then comes increasing the distance, which has become very popular term now, what we call social distancing. The better word is probably physical distancing. So if you can distance out the patient, it adds even further preventing your infection. Then comes decontaminating. Whatever zone of infection is there, this is a very important aspect, always underdone. So decontamination of the infected zone. So many hospitals have issue with decontaminating. I'm going to talk a little bit about that anyhow. And subsequently, it is the ventilation. Of course, we have structural problems. People never invested time, money, and resources on proper ventilation in hospitals. I'll talk a little bit, discuss about that also. And then finally, when a healthcare worker comes inside this infected zone, then only he requires full PPE. And hand hygiene, very important, and then disinfect the whole area. So these are the 4 or 5 fundamental principles we all work whenever we start working out on an area where we want to create an isolation ward or a COVID wards. So worldwide, it's been well known. Unfortunately, underemphasized is, even though we call ourselves infection preventionists, it's called IPC. So it's a prevention first, then control. At present in the pandemic, I think we already crossed a stage of prevention. We are already in the stage of control. So that is why we are creating isolation ward and we are trying to segregate the people. So we have gone the next phase, right? So just before I start about various process we put across in our hospital to control infection, this is a very good document which was put across by WHO. This is the latest one. Probably this month, and we are expecting one more update. So just to reiterate the strategies of IPC with those principles, first thing is something called fever clinic, that is early recognition and triaging of the suspected cases. Then once the patient enters, then again a physical separation. That means a COVID, non-COVID areas as much as possible, we separate it out. Of course, there are real challenges with the structural problems we have in our hospital. Once patient is admitted, you suspect or you have a confirmed case, then you apply transmission-based precautions depending upon the hospital area. Like whether you are at the entrance or whether you're working in a SARI ICU or whether you're working in a COVID ICU. The big challenge is educating people and re-educating. That's a very big challenge, and it should be a continuous process. And of course, disinfecting that areas and planning the biomedical waste, which could be a potential source of infection. Just to show how the fever clinic runs, this is the first step, which we call it as prevention strategy. That means you triage all the people, whoever is likely to be a potential cause of infection. So in this situation, we are talking about COVID. So anybody who is coming with ILI symptoms, SARI, you triage them. ILI, if you can manage outside hospital, at the fever clinic, you can manage. Of course, it comes with a lot of challenges. People tend to lie, our thermometers don't work, and there are a lot of issues. But many times this strategy works. It's fairly effective, at least in our hospital. Getting people used to it and training them is an issue. It takes about 2 weeks or so people to get used to it. Then once they're positive, of course, they are shifted to either the hospital. Right now, our hospital has also started COVID center, so we're going to shift them there. Once the patient is shifted inside the hospital, it's very important to identify that area. Once you identify that area, and within that facility, how we are going to manage. You should have a clear infected and a non-infected zones. And people who are infected zone, just like the principle what I've highlighted, in the infected zone, people should wear full PPE because these are suspect or probably confirmed cases. So non-infected area, you need not need full PPE, probably to a certain extent contact precautions and droplet precautions are required. What we have created in our hospital is something called a buffer zone, which is unique for us. So that is where the material move in and out. So we made a system that always material moves from non-infected to infected zone. So it doesn't come back, right? And that further reduces your risk. So the buffer zone is basically changing the mindset of healthcare workers that are entering an infected zone rather than having one simple line. That is a logic we all used. Then coming once this facility is established, the suspect patients or confirmed patients are there. The next step will be to apply the transmission precautions. So we need to remember that when we apply transmission precautions, it should be standard precautions for everybody, which we have been reiterating since last 50-20 years. So standard precautions and some previously called as universal precautions is for everyone. In COVID, you need an additional contact and droplet. Most of the droplet precautions include contact precautions. And if the area has an aerosol generating, probably airborne precaution. That's the challenge because most of our facilities do not have enough infrastructure to apply that. So this is all from our manual. So I've just shown you some of the things. So just to retrace some simple basics of standard precautions. Standard precautions has got 6 components. Hand hygiene, probably one of the most important thing and underemphasized. Then personal protective equipment. I am sure all of you heard about it. It's become very popular now. Safe injection practices. Then decontaminating all the equipment. It could be a big machine or it could be simple surgical instruments. Environmental cleaning and proper disposal of biomedical waste. So this is the core emphasis about standard precautions for any patient entering the hospital. This has been standard for many years now. So when we have a patient who have come and we require a contact precaution, something like MRSA, everybody should wash hands, gloved hand mask. Surgical gowns, we used to apply only once in a while because of the resources we have. But right now, because COVID needs both contact as well as it requires droplet precautions, so we advise people are going into infected area and suspect area to wear some sort of gown and of course mask. The other important thing is all the instruments, if they're coming out of the infected area, it has to be cleaned. Then droplet precaution, the only addition for that is the mask. Okay, the type of mask used. Most droplet precautions, a triple layer mask is more than enough, right? Unless, as I told you, you have a patient who is likely to be intubated or high aerosol producing or procedures like that are being done. Of course, they have to be put in a separate facility. Just to reiterate again, hand hygiene, one of the most neglected tool of infection control, underemphasized. The complaints rates have slightly gone up in the initial part, but slowly they're dropping back to pre-COVID era. This is a standard 5 movements of hand wash. The one big challenge, we have been auditing the number of steps followed by doctors. Many of them still don't wash hands properly. So it is like not reading half the chapters for the exam. So it's important not only wash hands, but follow all the steps. And our complaints rates for all steps are quite disheartening. It's about 12 to 15%, out of which only 2 to 3% are contributed by doctors. That's quite disheartening, even during this pandemic. Then coming to PPE, of course, PPE is very popular. These are some of the components of PPE, the face mask, N95 mask, the face shield, goggles, gown, apron, glove, head cover, and shoe cover is missing in this. So these are the ones. So when you want to use a PPE, the first step you need to do is risk assess. You can't have full PPE and go around. I am sure after the initial anxiety, people realize that it is not easy to wear full PPE and roam around, especially in the climate what we have and some of the PPE which are available in the market. I think people have understood, most of the healthcare workers. So every PPE should be risk assessment based on the risk assess. For example, somebody is at screening area, probably they require a glove, N95 mask and visor. Those who are entering an ambulance or something like that, probably then they need a gown, otherwise they don't need it. Whereas somebody working in isolation ward, which is COVID positive or SARI, probably they need far better PPE. Again, it doesn't mean full PPE. It all depends upon what is the procedures you're doing and how the ventilation of that facility is. And double gloving is important. Just to want to tell you before I go on to masks, one strange observation we have seen initially, some of the infections what we got in the hospital, especially by PGs and junior faculty, is that they were examining the patients without glove. So we have been emphasizing, we have publicized that. So that was a big challenge. Now I have seen the other extreme. There are a lot of doctors wearing glove and roaming around the hospital, which is not a good strategy for one simple reason, because when you wear a glove doesn't mean that you're protected. Second important thing is when you wear a glove, roam around, you are likely to cross transmit everywhere unless you decontaminate, you break the chain there. And remember that when you use alcohol, once or twice it is okay. If you use multiple times, glove will not work. Latex has a reaction with alcohol, especially above 70%, and also chlorhexidine. So please, once you finish your work with the glove, please doff it off, put it into the red bag, and wear a fresh one if you require. You need not roam around with the glove. So it has, and no glove is absolutely seal proof. They all have micropores. I just want to reiterate that. Just to give a snapshot of what the guidelines, all of you know, again, just trying to see how the risk-based is done. Show in ward and COVID ward, what we have. Of course, these we keep changing. These are a little bit older ones, based upon, not only based on science, but also the human behavior. People get anxious, people get upset, just hike it up. What government CDC and WHO is bare minimum. So availability on the facility you have and ability of the hospital to purchase, we hike it up. Other I forgot is the lot of people, as they were wearing more glove, our incidence of glove related allergy has gone up. The normal latex glove has powder in it. So a lot of nurses are complaining. So we have changed to nitrile glove. I'm sure all of the color glove. Okay, they're a little bit costly, but I think if somebody has allergy, they can always use it. Face mask, of course, one of the hot topic. A lot of people have talked about it. There are a lot of messages going around, a lot of publications about it. Just to tell you the range of cloth mask and what is a necessity to wear a mask. Any mask you wear has two simple functions. One, to protect yourself from a potential infection, which is either droplet or to a certain extent the aerosol. The second important need for or requirement or necessity of wearing a mask is as a source control, which I have told. So every person wears within the hospital. We don't know, some of them might be asymptomatic carriers, some of them can be pre-symptomatic. So that is the reason worldwide there is a big movement. Everybody should wear a mask because we can never predict whether we have infection or not. So, and the third important thing which is underemphasized is when you wear a mask and when you're examining a patient or when you touch the infected surface, it's a reflex habit. Many times we touch the face. So a mask will give a barrier from doing that. So that's one more advantage of wearing a mask. So there are variety of masks. Again, the problem with mask wearing is you have to choose your mask. You have to look at your resources. And most important, you have to wear your mask appropriately, right? If you don't wear it correctly, it's not going to serve the purpose. So coming to cloth mask, the primary aim of cloth mask is source reduction. So if you don't have anything, ask the patient to tie a kerchief. That will be far better than not wearing anything. But if you have cloth mask in your hospital, you can always give. Triple layer mask can be as a source reduction and as a healthcare protection. So we are advising all the patients admitted in our hospital should wear triple layer mask. So whenever you go for rounds, you see, don't enter the facility until the patient and the relative wears a mask. So only then you enter into the 3 or 6 feet within the patient. So, and it can also help in healthcare protection, definitely, except in some situations. Always remember that the triple layer mask, the name is given primarily because it has 3 layers. Each one has a different function. The outer surface is, remember, is water repellent, hydrophobic, where the inner one is primarily to absorb moisture so that we can breathe. So when you wear the mask ulta, you are reversing the whole process. It's not going to serve. Please always observe. As a rule of thumb, the dark color is always outside, the light color is always inside. The second common mistake while wearing surgical mask is when you wear it, you always see the nose bead or the nose clip should always be near your nose. Many times that also becomes ulta. There are 2 types available. One is loop type and the tie type. Loop type is easy to wear, but it doesn't fit in snugly. Okay, so the problem with the triple layer mask compared to N95, it doesn't fit in. That is the biggest disadvantage more than the material. And loop one probably even compromises that. So I would prefer you always wear a tied one. I know it's a little bit laborious. You can wear it for 4 to 5 hours, remove it and wear a fresh one. N95 respirator, of course, a very popular. Always issue is getting an quality one. There are a lot available now. A lot of Indian companies have started manufacturing. Every week I reject at least 4 or 5 N95 respirators because of the quality issues, but some I have to approve because otherwise we won't have stocks. Again, issue of wearing it correctly. If it is too loose, that means it may not be very effective, but you have to balance out the availability versus this. So I would say if you're going to a less risk area, probably you can wear an triple layer mask, which fits in properly and very comfortable. Most of the time I wear triple layer mask unless I go into an infected area. Then the other popular one, which is used in intensivist is elastomeric respirators. Yeah, ultimately the protection given by elastomeric respirators is very similar to N95, but the advantage is it can be reused. That's one biggest advantage, is reusable. but the process, the healthcare worker has to know how to reuse it, clean it. Filters have to be changed after a few weeks. It comes with a cost. And the picture which I showed is without a face shield. There are face shield ones also available when 3M ones cost about 4,000 to 5,000. Then the last one, probably powered air purifying respirator, PEPPER. Of course, they're very costly. The biggest advantage of that is, of course, it protects the healthcare worker best. It's reusable. More than that, it's very comfortable. It's very comfortable, so you can work, but it comes with a huge cost. Then just to reiterate again how important, of course, this is not based on virus, this is based on bacteria, how a simple wearing mask can be a source control. So please emphasize this more than you wearing. I think patient wearing or the person opposite you wearing the mask is most important. I've got at least some cases in our own hospital where I've categorized some of the healthcare workers as high risk because the opposite person was not wearing mask. Some of them turned out to be positive. So that is the potential thing wearing a mask by a patient can do. And it's like what we've been taught in the childhood, one stick you can break, 6 sticks is difficult. So all are as important. Washing hands, eye protection, face mask, physical distancing. So all are as important. Coming to ventilation, I don't think so we are in a great position ventilation because none of us in India ever invested time, money and resources while constructing about ventilation. Negative pressure rooms are still in your textbooks. It's a distant reality. Even in the countries where there are a lot of negative pressure rooms, they were overwhelmed. So the best solution is always natural ventilation. So whenever you construct hospital or wherever possible, always have a cross ventilation, what has been taught to us in the TB wards. So there are 3 different types of ventilation. I'm not talking about ventilator, it's ventilation. So natural ventilation, mechanical ventilation, and hybrid. Mechanical ventilation is something like what we have ACs, right? Central AC, split AC. Split AC is worse because there's hardly any air coming from outside going out. So it's not a great idea to have split ACs. Hybrid ACs are usually in the high-end hospitals and high-end malls, they've used it. It's a combination of natural and mechanical. So whenever you have ventilation, we need to understand there are 3 basic A's in it: number of air exchanges, air direction, and air flow, right? The best is all 3 fitting in. It's difficult. We have tried in some of the areas, it's working okay. Some of the OTs we converted into negative pressure OTs so that any emergency cases, suspect cases can be operated. And even in SARI ICU, we have changed the number of air exchanges, tried to put in more, and we have put it some filters, UV filters. There is some data emerging that it can be used near air exchanging units. Disinfection, very important aspect, often neglected part of infection control and even doctors. So there are 2 types of disinfection. One is regular disinfection. When the patient is inside, you do regularly. Because there's a manpower shortage, whenever you plan for regular disinfection, plan only for high-touch surfaces, something like door handles, bed railings, the tables. These are the ones you should be emphasized. And choose your disinfectant not based on internet data, based on local facility. Can you afford it? Is the concentration fine? Contact time, all these are important. So simple thing I would say is always use hypochlorite 1%, which you can prepare, but discard it within 24 hours for most of the surfaces, except for furnitures. When you use for furnitures, you lose furnitures in a couple of weeks time. So if you don't get anything, simply buy 70% alcohol, put it onto a cloth, and you can just wipe it. Very effective for COVID. Disinfection in ICU and instruments is a huge challenge. We keep seeing a lot of new gadgets coming into ICU because people are manufacturing, and hardly any data, neither from the manufacturer, neither available in it, how to disinfect them. Classic example is high flow nasal oxygen. I'm sure in few months time, we will get data how they can be a potential source of infection. Because government is supplying to a lot of hospitals without giving enough time and emphasis onto how to disinfect them. They can be real potential source. Actually, it's very simple, but people are not doing it. And other important thing, whenever you disinfect, please don't disinfect immediately. Wait for, if possible, half an hour so that the viral load comes down and your healthcare worker who is entering, which is often the your housekeeping, which the people we often ignore, don't get infected. So when we mop it, it can cause some aerosols and they can inhale it. Wait for half an hour, let the viral load come down, then you can mop. Then can be reused after 1 to 2 hours. Ideally 6 hours, but we are not in ideal situation. So please don't reuse, wait for 6 hours, because if patient is waiting, you can use probably an hour and a half or 2. Fogging and UVC used only as terminal infection, because there's a lot of publicity about these things. Please remember, they cannot replace mechanical cleaning. They can only be when you bring down the viral load in the surfaces, and whatever the housekeeping has missed, they can supplement, but they cannot completely replace this. And UVC has potential carcinogen. So all this have to be. And when you mop also, it's very important. Many hospitals I visited, there's completely opposite. Always remember, you start from clean area, go to the infected area. And your housekeeping should be taught about which is the direction they should go out of the room, which direction they should mop. Just showing an example from our manual. Then coming to biomedical waste is a potential source. We always follow the guidelines from ministry. There's no major change. I don't think so. You need to bother much about it. Latest one was released about a week back. You need an additional label of COVID waste, double covers, even for suspect. The one thing which common problem we find is storage. As same principle, when you have virus in it, please store it in a dedicated area. Let the viral load come down. Then only allow your housekeeping to take. Don't keep them under risk, and keep the pathway for biomedical waste as much as possible clear, as well as a dedicated pathway. So that solves majority of the problem, and fix up a time when the biomedical waste can move. So these are the simple principles we have also been using. The last one, probably the most toughest one in infection control, which we have been trying, is human behavior. Yeah, we have not been very successful. Right? And more senior you are, more difficult it becomes. Excuses, opinions, complaints, and when we observe, they do in a different way, which we call it as Heathrow effect. So now people want data. So often we come out with complaints rates and audit tools, try to show them what you can do. Classic example is how hand hygiene rates have suddenly picked up just during the time of lockdown and slowly going back. So it's purely related to your anxiety and your own habits. Just to show how we do, this is the mask audit we did. Clearly, we found that mask audit is quite good. Suddenly, we found one section of people not wearing masks. That's anesthetics. So immediately, we conducted an education program, and we could improve it. Of course, that intervention alone is not the only one which made the difference. The other one is mask might be worn 100%, but the way they wear. So again, the issue is the patients were wearing only 62%. This is about a month back data from ours. So ensure that identify these areas and we need to order. Again, we have to work as a team. Each one takes that responsibility. You find somebody not doing, you act then and there. Don't expect infection control or somebody to come and do that work. We have to work as a team. Now coming to the what I'm supposed to talk today. So I will just tell you the highlights of what we are doing and how we are managing the exposure of healthcare workers. The first thing we need to realize, it's a reality that a lot of healthcare workers are getting infected and some of the healthcare workers might fall sick. That's a reality. The first step is always identifying the healthcare workers who are high risk exposure. So they can be in the COVID area or non-COVID area, right? So the limit the introduction and spread within the hospital. So what happens is if you can pick them up early, right? There are different strategies. I'll talk about it. One thing you can do is you can spread the local hotspots. I will just tell you how it has happened in our own hospital when I was investigating it. There are different strategies which have been opted, primarily coming from US and European data, and it's nothing new. These strategies have been used in the previous outbreaks also. One is self-reporting, which is again boils down to human behavior. That's the stage actually right now in our hospital. We are encouraging all departments. I've been addressing all departments. So self-report. Any PG or any healthcare worker has symptoms, please inform. Don't come to the job. You inform your higher authorities, test them early and see if negative, they can join back, or based on the triaging, you can decide. Active surveillance, it's more resource straining. So you actively pursue, every day you call your healthcare workers and ask, are you having symptoms? Are you any problem? That is one active surveillance. We need a lot of manpower, which is very difficult now that university made 50% rule. So it's a real constraint for us, but that's a better way. Then testing. So when do you test? Right now, we are in a phase where we are testing symptom based. So some healthcare worker has a symptom, you go and test them. Of course, we are going to miss a lot of pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic people. That's a challenge. The other half is active surveillance. That means you start testing a lot of people within the hospital, and it can, same thing is applicable in the society also. I've already suggested to management that we should slowly move on to active surveillance, because the number of healthcare workers have turned positive has significantly increased. Question is how we are going to do. Are we going to randomly do it, or based upon how we are going to focus on? So the present plan is you identify the hotspots within the hospital, and then some areas in the hospital we found out, then we are actually pursuing it. So that's active surveillance. Of course, we need to test a lot, and we're going to pick up a lot of doctors and nurses, which they have to go out of job. Infections among healthcare workers. I was just looking at the rates of healthcare workers. It's not strange that non-COVID areas got healthcare workers got more infection than SARI, then more than COVID facility. There are multiple reasons for it. One reason could be human behavior. One reason could be the facilities available. There are multiple reasons, and this is not unique to our hospital. In fact, all hospitals are showing it. And I can assure you that our IPC protocols are fairly good. For example, if you look at the Timepai hospital, which has been running since 3.5 months, now around 100-120 patients are there. Till now, we had only 3 healthcare workers who got infected, out of which 2 are definitely from community acquired. Only 1 nurse got from the subsequent nurse, because they shared lunch together. So that brings down to how are these hotspots created within the hospital. It's very, very evident when I was looking and analyzing the data. Most of the infections within the juniors, faculty and PGs occurred in the eateries. They were all going to mess or canteen or having coffee, tea together, or going to parties. The one thing you need to understand that when you go and eat or drink, you cannot wear a mask. And you most often, you talk, you laugh, and you're in close proximity. Exactly what we don't want. So we had at least 3 clusters like that within junior PGs, which had a huge concentration of cross transmission. So as a first step, I requested the hospital administration to cut down on the eateries and do parcel service alone. Even then, it is difficult. Of course, there was a lot of inhibition, and I had to face a lot of criticism, but it was done in a good interest. Even now, I find PGs, because we stopped it, they're going out and eating. That's how human behavior is. So ultimately, I think seniors have to take some responsibility and talk to them regularly, right? Then 1-2 strange cohorts have identified within the hospital. Both seniors and junior doctors, either they are extremely anxious group or completely indifferent group. Anxious group are always changing their habits of PP. Either suddenly they started wearing masks, suddenly they're wearing face shields where it is not required. Indifferent group, whatever you do, they don't change their habits. They say, don't worry, if I get it, I'll get it, doesn't matter. So both are very difficult cohorts to handle for us. So we have to strike a balance, and probably by talking is the only way where we can help out. Then risk assessment. This is how we do risk assessment. On the left-hand side, you can see the government copy. Based on that, we do line listing. This is just an example of how we line list one patient. What we do is we risk assess. You can see some of them turned out to be high risk. So based on what was their distance, what was happening. So there are a lot of things we ask. because numbers have gone up significantly. Previously, I myself used to do. I decentralized each department. We nominated 1 or 2 staff. They do it themselves, and then I finally put it. I have to submit it to the district surveillance officer. So once you are high risk, things change. So level of exposure is high risk or low risk. High risk means they are in the patient area and had not recommended people. Say this, the government statement. Now what we have done is we have gone outside hospital. If any healthcare worker during the infective phase had a party, cake cut, selfie or anything, close proximity, they become high risk without mask. Till date, about 2,000 healthcare workers we line listed. About 20%, 15 to 20% are high risk. Some of them turned out to be positive. Reassuring is whatever we put at low risk, less than 1% turned out to be positive. That means our risk categorization is fairly okay, right? I know it's not foolproof. So what happens to them? Once you make a patient call them as high risk, one, we submit that to the government. So they track their phones. End of 7th day, they test them. For our hospital, what we do is we put them in NIH hostel. Nurses, we have a separate hostel, housekeeping separate area. 7th day, they get tested. If they're positive, of course, they go to COVID care center or COVID hospital. If they are asymptomatic, they can join back work. If they have become symptomatic earlier, it used to be 14. We could convince the local government that it should be reduced. So fortunately, because we are slowly running out of healthcare workers who can work. Too many people getting infected. Low risk, they can continue to work, monitor symptoms. If they are symptomatic, you just test them. So just to summarize the whole thing, so COVID-19, remember, like any other viral infection, of course, with a different transmittability, right? And to a certain extent, how it stimulates our immune system. And we don't have any specific drug as such, which is something like a ceftriaxone for enteric fever. We don't have anything like that. So emphasis should be more on prevention, even if it is treatment supportive, triaging them. So I don't know how we have completely neglected the preventive science. Is often underfunded, under-recognized, right from our MBBS and postgraduate times. And since the 1960s to 70s, when a lot of therapeutic medicine has started, the number of publications of preventive science and journals have come down. That's so sad to see. I don't know, probably human race is paying the price for it because we completely neglected it. So the way forward is probably in hospital is infection prevention and control. In community level, it's macro control and vaccine, which is still elusive for us. I don't know when we are going to get and how effective. There's a lot of debate about it. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm willing to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Verma, for a wonderful lecture. He has covered almost all aspects of COVID. He has covered importance of hand hygiene, safe distancing, and what are the strategies adopted in our hospital for prevention of COVID. I think this applies to all the infections which we come across. So if there are any questions, we will be happy to take. I am seeing not any questions. If it's not there, I can ask one question to Verma.
Yes, sir.
So you told that regarding N95 mask, this guidelines keep on changing. Initially, it was told that people need not wear the mask. Then they told that in OPD, surgical mask is sufficient. Then the latest says that N95 is essential in the OPD. That's one question. Second thing is that you told about eateries being the source of infection. Maybe there is some part, but there are so many other things which could have caused the spread of infection in our hospital, I feel. Not the eateries alone. Because so many people who have got the infection, I have asked specifically, they told that they didn't have any specific instances where it is like that.
So the answer to the first one is, again, I told you the guidelines change not only based on science, but also about the perception and the anxiety within the healthcare workers. So if you look at the science, in areas like OPD, areas like in the wards, a triple layer mask is more than enough. But if the number of COVID positive patients increase, suspect COVID, the present guidelines from WHO and CDC is probably it is worth asking for N95 mask. For one simple reason, because it's again balancing out your cost, availability, etc. Right? Effective wise, unless you're doing aerosol producing and patient is wearing a mask, a triple layer mask is more than enough. Guidelines are not based purely on the science. It's also about a lot of other things. Availability, the in the country, in the local area, the purchasability of the hospital. So a lot of things. So when we put our guidelines in infection control, we look into all this. Fortunately, even during the peak lockdown hours, we never had shortage of any of the PPE. Right now also we are fairly good stock wise. So we are saying that you can use N95, but most areas and triple layer mask should be more than enough. If you are in somewhere like probably you are in area where we are totally unknown, a face shield or a goggles might be helpful, especially when you're in vicinity in the less than 3 to 6 feet area. Then coming to the second question, so whatever I've been mentioned is not that 100% of the healthcare workers got infected by the clusters. What I'm saying, majority of them, the initial trend of our all healthcare workers, majority of them were through community. So they came and spread. Then that spread became hotspots within the hospital. I'm talking about 80% of the infections are due to that. Even now, there are some issues. What is the problem is, as we go forward, probably have to recommend active surveillance. We're going to pick up a lot of asymptomatic healthcare workers, which we are already picked up. So like cancer block, there is a hotspot. So a lot of doctors and nurses and patients got infected. So we had to shut down a lot of things. And then we investigated and we have tested all the nurses about few days back. Some of them turned out to be positive or totally asymptomatic. So going forward, it will be impossible to tell where the source has arisen from. Neither we have resources, neither we have a definite way to prove it. But at least there is some areas. So when we designate the healthcare workers as high risk and low risk, so those high risk people, about 60% turned out to be positive. So that is how we found out the clusters are, like those who went for a party, those who had food together. So these are all junior PGs and junior faculty. I'm not saying everybody is through that.
One question from Professor N.R. Rao. Your opinion on
Yes.
herd immunity? Because there are some studies coming from Delhi. They have done about some few sample and they are saying that 24% of the Delhi population is affected. And then suddenly one news came that so many people in Karnataka are already affected. So other news started coming that we have already developed herd immunity. What is your view on present status?
So first thing, sir, you need to understand is herd immunity is difficult to define, right? At what percentage we're going to get herd immunity, it breaks the chain of infection spread. The other most important is how we measured immunity of a person. We are always using antibodies. We are checking only humoral immunity. We are not checking cell-mediated immunity, which is also an important for viral infection. The big challenge more than that is step number 3, that how effective and how sensitive are the kits which are available in the market. So they are not very good. Most of the kits available are either coming from Korea, which are fairly okay, or from China. Right now, we have started testing some of our healthcare workers. My test was also done. I had to know my result, but till now, whatever I've done, all are negative. I don't know whether to take it as a good, that means our infection control policies are working well, or is it a bad news, people can get infected. So the fourth important thing is will this immunity last for long? That part we are not sure at all, because this is behaving very strangely, right? So it can last for people say about 3 to 6 months. So much uncertainty, so I don't want to speculate on it.
Professor Sudha Vidyasagar asked us question. WHO says asymptomatic patients not spreading the COVID, but you told that there are clusters in our hospital. I think I was definitely seeing the clusters in cancer block and even in nephrology. Is it from the patient or asymptomatic carriers? We don't know. What is your opinion on that? Asymptomatic person or oligosymptomatic? What you say?
Sir, I want to correct that statement. I don't think WHO never said that asymptomatic cannot carry. That is the document which I uploaded and showed it in one of the slides. They are not sure whether the rate at which an asymptomatic people can transmit an infection. There's a little bit debate, but there are a group of scientists who are very convinced for one simple reason, because amount of virus in an asymptomatic and asymptomatic people are very similar. So the assumption is they both can transmit. I don't actually is some doubt. So they want to, WHO doesn't want to swear and say that it is 100%, just like airborne precaution. But I don't think so. WHO said that it cannot be transmitted. There is convincing evidence that asymptomatic people can transmit infection.
Okay, one more question is from Dr. Ramchandra Joshi. Exposure of a doctor during routine rounds to a COVID positive patient, maintaining routine precautions, wearing a gloves and a N95 mask by both doctor, patient is wearing. What is the level of exposure? You take it as a high risk, low risk?
Answer this.
Yes.
I told this, wears a mask, simple as a cloth mask, your risk of infection significantly comes down. Second thing is, can you maintain the distance? It's not possible for physicians because we have to go and examine. So once you go and examine, that means you are entering the infected zone. That's about less than 3 feet. So then the second mode of prevention starts, that is your contact and droplet precaution. So you need to wear a mask. I would say triple layer mask is good enough, but if you're wearing N95, that's it. Whenever you examine or you entered the infected zone in hospital, I have actually marked long back all the red lines. So you have to wear a glove. So when you touch anything which is patient infected, so you wear a glove. Once you finish the examination, if you are too busy, you have to examine the next patient, you can use alcohol rub over that glove for once or twice, or you can remove the glove and go on. If you do this, your risk of transmission is extremely low. That's what I'm telling. Whatever data is available from our own hospital, those who followed the exact PPE, I have hardly found anybody get infected. Of course, all this will change once there are numbers go up. So it's just going bizarre in our hospital. Too many people are getting infected. So I would say if you're wearing a mask, right now probably wearing a goggles makes sense, or a face shield, because the numbers have gone up. Then you're wearing a glove, then it should be more than enough. More than enough. Your risk is negligible.
Okay.
Ensure that patient is wearing. That's more important than you wearing the full PPE.
Professor Shubha Madam has asked, how often should we change our N95 mask? I will extend the question a little bit more, because when the All India Institute gave the N95 masks, they told it has to be worn one, second day different, third day different, fourth day different. We didn't follow it. Actually, I was going through that. It's ideal to wear the N95 today, second day different, one that we can wear it after fourth day. Why we didn't follow it, or is it not given in the guidelines? That's what All India Institute came with this thing. We have to keep it in a separate paper mask, paper on this thing.
So first point, N95 masks are not meant to be reused. So you look at a 3M company or Honeywell, any company, they're single time use. There are two problems in it. One is called extended use, other one is reuse. So when you say an extended use, by definition, that means for every patient you're supposed to remove, go to unexpected, where a fresh mask can go. That is what the recommendation by SHIA as well as CDC, which is not practical. So we are actually already using an extended use. Second thing is reuse. Reuse means you doff, then use it after a certain time or a certain amount of time. That strategy is also used only when we are short supply or resources are a problem or a cost is a problem. So we stuck to the plan which we have already been doing for one simple reason. Whatever AIIMS have said is based on science, but totally impractical. So even 3 days mask, when we audited, significant portion of them actually were not changing on third day. They were discarding. The storing was a huge issue. So I was speaking to some of the AIIMS people. They themselves are struggling to do it. It's more a theoretically correct, but I don't think so it's practical. So in infection control, we change our guidelines based on practical. And at present, we are fairly okay. I am willing to reduce it to 48 hours in few weeks' time when our store supply is much better. So N95 masks are not meant to be reused. That's a simple rule, but we are reusing because we have either due to cost reasons and all. So I am not a great fan of what the AIIMS has done that, and they themselves do not have a follow-up audit whether how many of them really did. The third issue with doing that is at once I have to give 3 to 4 masks for a healthcare worker. So my stock will be huge problem in the hospital, and 60% of them do not come back with that. So that will be a huge burden on the hospital. And knowing human behavior, that's the reason why we never implemented that in a hospital. We are sticking to the 3 days. Probably going forward, we might reduce it to 2 days.
Okay.
As
One more
situation
question
evolves.
from Sandeep Pai. Same thing. Can asymptomatic patient, probably asymptomatic patient or patient party without mask transmitting infection by routine talking with doctor or other person? That's what
Yeah,
Sudha will ask.
definitely. So, as I told, talking is definitely one of the way they can transmit. So that is how droplets spread. That's because we are within 3 to 6 feet. So if you read the WHO document, there is a clear evidence stating that asymptomatic people, when they talk, it can transmit. So the debate is the debate is not about whether they transmit. The debate is the data analysis is an issue. Many of them, what they told them is asymptomatic. Actually, when they many studies didn't follow up, those who followed up, most of them turned out to be pre-symptomatic. So we should not brand them as asymptomatic. So in fact, if you look at the WHO document, it gives percentage ranging from 70 to 95% or something like that. So actually, many of them are not actually asymptomatic. They're actually pre-symptomatic. So when you follow up them, they turned out to be positive. We are also looking at our own data as we picking up more and more asymptomatic healthcare workers. Probably when we look at them, then we will know that how many of them turned out to be. And majority of the studies, when they quote asymptomatic, they've ignored mild symptoms because they're self-reported.
Okay. Ashok Achar is asking, in some cases, if you see that only 1% of the family is affected, if they are close staying with the family, why other people are not affected? Are others family immune to infection? Because this is, I have also found some family members, whole family is affected.
So there are multiple reasons for it. One of the major reasons is how the house structure is, right? How is the ventilation is, and how do the humans behave inside that house? Are they having food together? Are they wearing masks? How often they would? Like just to try to give an example, right? We had a patient last week. She has come positive. When we analyzed followed up the whole family, she has 2 kids and she stays with the husband. Husband is positive, daughter is positive, but the son is negative. So the question is, we try to find out why. So son is preparing for exam, so he was always staying in the room only and trying to do everything there. So there is probably some amount of physical distance helped him. See, one thing you need to realize is not that every time you come in contact with one person, you'll immediately get infected. Even COVID positive, I'm telling. It's the probability. Longer you stay, more instances you stay, you get. So in fact, I had 2 postgraduates of one department where they had multiple contacts with positive cases. Those who had one did not develop. Those who had multiple contacts with multiple people have turned out to be positive had. So it is not that you stand for a few hours with that patient, you'll 100% get. I would say an analogy is something like how the transmission rates of HIV, blood transfusion is 95%, sexual contact is about 5 to 20%. The other big challenge, one reason why some of them are not picked up is the technique they do to test. The testing, so if you look at the data which is available for the sensitivity of the PCR, one of the caveat is that how the testing is done, how the sample is collected. Even now, many centers do not have a good nasal swab. Ideal recommended nasal swab is a nylon float, which many centers don't have. We just start introducing it. So that is also one reason why. Second reason is the transportation. So when the transportation does not happen in a given time, because we need to maintain a temperature, the viral load comes down. Of course, the technique, the cycle thresholds, all these are also issues. So it's about the technique of sampling, transportation, technique followed. All this will add up. So do we have proof that these are all? We don't have it. But one group of family, at least I can remember, that initially they came positive, then the second sample was done for different reasons, they turned out to be positive. So there's no one single answer for that, but this is not
because it's a famous
unknown in
personality.
most of the viral infections.
No, if you say the famous personality, Amitabh Bachchan was positive, his son is positive, Aishwarya is positive, daughter is positive, wife is negative, two people are negative in the same family. I don't think they would have had a close contact or this thing.
So we don't know their family dynamics, sir. I don't think so. We should speculate about it.
Yeah, okay, that's okay. One more question is from Dr. Joshi. Previous question is the chance of exposure with the patient if he is fully protected during rounds. What is the role of quarantining the doctor? During routine, proper precaution are taken necessary for home quarantine for the doctor. What is the sensitivity and specificity of rapid antigen test also?
Yeah. So coming to the first question, there are two questions, I believe. One question is about quarantine of doctor. Second one is the rapid antigen test.
Home quarantine of the doctor.
Home quarantine.
Yeah.
So home quarantine is primarily you're telling that a doctor is exposed and then the doctor has to go for home quarantine. That will be the great strategy when you have enough workforce left. So one of the initial strategies worldwide, and we also tried, is form two teams. Raviraj sir has put up like that. One team works, one team takes off, and one team goes on to the non-COVID area or less risk area. That is strategies which have been well implemented. It's great on paper, but once actually the COVID hits your department or your hospital, then things dynamic changes. You will not have enough workforce. So you need to balance out on that. Probably we need to look at people who are high risk and then segregate them. Somebody like elderly, comorbidities, vulnerable, ask them to do something like from the home. Quarantine, if you think you have enough workforce, it's great. So one of the strategies, one group works, one group is off. Ideally, it will be 7 days because most of the infections come within 7 to 8 days. 85%, rest 15% scattered over the next 10 to 12 days. So I don't think so in our hospital we have a luxury to do it because a lot of healthcare workers are turning to be positive.
Sensitivity and specificity of rapid antigen test.
Yeah, coming to rapid antigen test, couple of things I want to reiterate. Rapid antigen test is not a blood-based test. It's again a nasal swab. That means you need to have some infection control practices in place. You need to identify an area where you're going to do a swab. And second most important thing, it has to be test done by the doctor himself. No lab is involved because within 15 minutes to half an hour, the buffer will dilute and it's not going to work. So the doctor only does, doctor only tests. It's really full-time bedside test. Issue with antigen test is it's extremely specific, but sensitivity has an issues. So the present recommendation is if it is positive, great, you take it. If it is negative, look at patient is symptomatic or not. If the patient is asymptomatic, probably you are in trouble, so you don't know what to do. If patient is symptomatic, you retest again, or you can go for RT-PCR. That is how it is. So it has issues with it. Again, antigen testing always have an issue with respect to swabbing. So create an area where you're going to swab, full PPE, decontaminate that area once you're testing. So best strategy is, and you can test it yourself. And to reiterate again, every antigen test has to be entered into ICMR portal. Again, the same old problems of SRF number entering. And since doctor is doing, the onus falls on him.
Okay. Next question is from Raviraj Acharya, sir. What is the viral load in saliva? Can we expect it? IIT has come out with the prototype of this thing from the saliva. Any comments on that?
So saliva probably has the highest concentration. Actually, if you ask any lab people, the best sample for COVID is sputum, because it's such an aerosol producing and it is difficult to manage people to spit exactly into the VTM, and labs are not willing to accept sputum as a source. Then probably that is a reason. So saliva, I don't have an exact number. What is the concentration of it? What is the second half of the question, sir?
What is the viral load in saliva? Can we expect IIT has come out with the prototype he has written?
Yeah, so as I said, if saliva can be used, but issue is lab should have better biosafety levels, and then swabbing is can be avoided. But we need to create an area, how the saliva can be transported, temperature maintenance. So these are the practical issues. Ideal will be somebody goes near the lab, spit it into the, like how we give AFB, and drop it there and go. That will be ideal, but practical issues.
So last two questions. One question is from Sudha Madam. When sister, you told that wearing gloves is you have to remove. When sisters look after the patient, wearing gloves, do they change the gloves with the patient between, or what about when they touch files?
Glove wearing, I'm okay as long as they decontaminate the hands in between the patients. So all they need to do is, what we've recommended is they should wash, they use alcohol rub over the gloved hand, because they don't have that much time between the patients. They have a lot of work to do. If that does, you're breaking the chain. The issue with that is the gloves will spoil. So we are saying moment they feel alcohol within the hand, they have to remove the glove and wear a new one. Same applies for the file also. If they're coming and touching the file, in between, if they use hand rub, that should be good enough, because that decontaminates and destroys the virus. The strategy is good for virus, probably not great for bacteria.
Okay. One last question from Sandeep. How do you identify good N95 masks? Because there are a lot of fake N95s going around.
So as I've already told you, about 90% of the masks which come to me, I reject it. But what to do? I have to accept some, otherwise no mask will be available. There is a political angle for it. There are only 4 original manufacturers of N95. All 4 are American companies, and most of their manufacturing hubs were in China.
Yeah.
So except some here and there in India, one we have. See, the problem is post Galvan Valley incident, all the ships coming from China have been blocked. So we don't have supply for N95. So that is one huge problem we're going to face. I don't know when government is going to release those ships to enter our waters. And the other thing is, moment the pandemic hit US, the federal government made a rule that the supply first should be for US rather than non-US countries. So these are all supply chain problems. To identify the best mask, ideal, I will tell you, it is not, you're not going to get that. Probably 3M is best. We have enough stocks of 3M, so we are supplying primarily for, excuse me, we are supplying for SARI and the COVID areas. The others, ideally, you should put it, and when you blow air, there should not be any leak. And when you inhale air, it should partially collapse. That is one way to make out it is good. And then, of course, always ask your company to see, ideally, I mean, N95 should have 6 layers of different quality. All of them are made of the same material, in fact, polypropylene or polyethylene. So you can look into it. One simple way I do is when I go is whether they are meeting standards. Either they should meet European standards or American standards. Usually seal will be there. So you look for those things at least, or look at the company's literature. It's one way to make out, but you will never get an ideal one.
Right. Thank
We are
you.
far from-
Only last two questions, but I think you answered already. Dr. Ashok Kumar Vaidya has commented, nice talk. He says antigen test is ICMR approved. Because I heard from Bangalore, most of the hospitals are doing antigen test to take in the patient also.
Yeah, it is ICMR approved, sir. Only
Ah.
thing is we have to enter that into portal.
Yeah,
We have to
okay.
take that
Same
responsibility.
method.
Same. It's not about testing. ICMR approved. We already started in SARI ICU. We have already done 6 or 7. Training has to be given. You'll get the report in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But problem is the result has to be. So right now we got 100 kits from government. So we have to send back those reports to government. When we
Okay.
buy, we have to enter into the portal. It
Okay.
is ICMR approved.
Okay.
We are getting from a South Korean company. So that's what we got right
South Korean company. Okay.
now. South Korean company,
Okay.
SD.
Sandeep has asked one question because all of us have found how to sanitize common items like mobile watch, mobiles, wallets, stats. How to wear, found
Yeah,
difficult to wear stats and wearing full PPE.
So the first thing rule is don't take anything which you cannot sanitize. That's the first simple rule in infection control. Whatever you have said, mobile, you can put it in a Ziploc and you can use it. And most of the mobiles, whatever I've read, literature and all, they can be easily sanitized by alcohol. Not that you put it into an alcohol dip. I'm saying take cotton and wipe it off. Should be more than enough. Alcohol will kill coronavirus. It's not effective against most bacteria, but corona, it is very good. Same applies for the steth, but it's practically difficult. For steth, there are a lot of varieties available. You can have a stickies available for every patient. You can remove the sticky and reuse it. I mean, you can use it. So there are different lists. Best strategy is not to take anything which you cannot sanitize, and alcohol should be more than enough.
Thank you, Varma.
I got one patient whose antigen is negative, but she has got a cytokine storm right now. She has got a very bad lung with ARDS. But RT-PCR is at come. So how do we go? Like antigen, I think, is it you feel it's reliable?
That's why it's not a very sensitive test. It's very specific. So probably you have to wait for RT-PCR. RT-PCR in a symptomatic patients, first 3 days sensitivity is about 90 to 93%. So probably RT-PCR will come positive. If you're still suspecting it comes negative, please repeat it, sir.
No, she is already gone for ARDS since she's down the hill. Yeah, she is a case of happy pneumonia, like no symptoms or anything was there. Just on X-ray we got it.
That's what I'm saying, sir. Antigen is, if it is negative, it cannot be relied upon. So if you think it is COVID, continue to treat and wait for the result. That's what I'm telling.
No, problem is none of the hospitals admit because it is under non-COVID then. Got
So
a
they
hit,
have
yeah?
to, that is where the hospital should have something what government has said, the SARI ICU, the unsuspected area.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Okay,
Thank
thank you, Varma, for a wonderful lecture and a lot of questions, very interactive session. I think most of the doubts are cleared. I will hand over to Sandeep for concluding remarks.
Thanks a lot, sir. Hello, am I audible?
Thank you, Dr. Sandeep.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dr. Muralidhar Verma, sir. In spite of your busy schedules and
you are
almost on a daily basis, you are doing these workshops and seminars and lectures. You found time to give a nice talk on infection prevention in healthcare workers. On behalf of API Udupi Manipal, I extend a very warm thanks to you. I also thank our chairperson and moderator, Dr. M. Mukhyapranna Prabhu, sir, for chairing this session. I also thank all the members who have joined from their homes or from their clinics for this wonderful session. Thank you, one and all. At the last, I would also like to thank the sponsors for today's meet, the micro people. I extend a warm thanks to you also, Mr. Gokul Das and his team, technical team. Thank you. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Varma. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
We close this meeting, sir.
Yeah, we'll close the meeting. Thank you very much, micro people and.
Yeah, Mr. Subhash Chandra Shetty is our.
Yeah, Subhash Chandra. Yeah. Thank you.
He is the
and,
one who
Gokul
initiated,
also.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. We'll be always
Thank
at your
you.
service, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Verma.